Let me ask you a question. What do you think of when you hear the name Medusa? Perhaps her snake hair, her terrifying visage, or perhaps her famously deadly gaze. For most people, Medusa is known for being able to turn people to stone with a single look. But what if her powers were more than just that? What if Medusa could actually do so much more than most people think? If you're interested in finding out, then stick around until the end, because today we're going to be exploring 3 hidden powers that Medusa had that nobody ever knew about. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's me, and here we bring you new videos every week exploring all facets of mythology, folklore, and the paranormal. Now before we get started, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell if you're not already, so that you can be the first to know when we upload a new video. Also, be sure to share your thoughts and any additional information you might have about Medusa down in the comments below. Now let's jump right in. We all know Medusa as the monster that lived atop the high peak of Mount Ossa in the northwest corner of Greece. However, there are more details surrounding her origins that help us to understand her and her powers better. To start, it's important to know that Medusa was actually one of 3 monsters called the Gorgons. We know this from the writings of Hesiod, specifically from his Theogony, which we mentioned in our previous video. According to Hesiod, they were daughters of the sea god Phorcys and Ceto, who was a daughter of Poseidon. Their 3 heads were said to sprout wings, had great claws, and were terrifying to behold. That may sound horrifying, but it gets worse. According to the poet Stasinus, Medusa was especially vile with blood dripping from her mouth and nostrils, and the skin of her arms covered with scales. This definitely paints a picture of a beastly creature, but it still doesn't fully encapsulate the totality of Medusa's power. In order to better understand how she wielded her powers, we need to break down her most well-known attack, her gaze. Most people assume that her power came directly from her appearance, that those who looked upon her face were immediately turned to stone. But what if there's more to her gaze than meets the eye? In the myths, it's specifically stated that whoever looked upon her face would immediately be changed to stone. And while we now know that Medusa was a Gorgon, originally a Gorgon, we didn't really understand exactly what that meant. So maybe we can look to other animals for insight. Gazelles use their gazelles to attract mates and to warn off predators. Some animals, like horses, have a flight response, meaning they bolt away when faced with danger. Others, like ostriches, play dead in order to camouflage themselves. The point is that animals utilize different strategies based on their individual needs and circumstances. Maybe the same can be said of Medusa's gaze. What if her deadly glare was more of a metaphor, a symbol of how she utilized her unique abilities depending on the situation she found herself in? For example, she could have used her venomous spit to transform her enemies into stone instead of saying that she did it with her eyes. Or maybe her stare didn't turn people to stone, but merely represented her immense power over those who opposed her. In fact, the Latin word for Medusa's stare, intuior, translates roughly to "I look intently," suggesting that her power lay not only in her appearance but in her focus and determination. This idea of Medusa's gaze as a metaphor rather than a literal ability is further supported by the fact that it was typically only mortals who were turned to stone, never gods. After all, a god's wisdom and experience would prevent them from staring at a monster, whereas a mortal man might find himself unable to look away. So, while Medusa was likely capable of wielding powers that even gods feared, we can't say for certain what those powers were. But what we can discuss is her curse. We know from Greek mythology that Medusa's curse was placed on her by Athena after Poseidon assaulted her within the goddess's temple. As punishment, Athena transformed Medusa into a monster, replacing her beautiful hair with snakes, giving her wings, tusks, claws, and a terrifying visage that could turn men to stone with a single look. But what if this curse itself was a power? After all, it allowed her to protect herself against those who would seek to harm her, as well as allowing her to slay those who dared approach her. She could use her newfound abilities to defend herself and even strike back at those who had wronged her. In that sense, Medusa's curse became a blessing, a tool she could use to survive in a world that had become dangerous for her. Furthermore, this curse highlights another interesting aspect of Medusa's powers, her immortality. While most humans grow old and eventually die, Medusa remained forever young, forever cursed to live out her days as a monster. This immortality could be seen as both a blessing and a curse, offering her endless life but at the cost of her humanity. Nevertheless, it was yet another tool she could use to survive in a world that sought to destroy her. But one of Medusa's most recognizable features was the snakes that adorned her head. In art depicting her likeness, they're always shown sprouting from her temples and weaving through her hair, sometimes even acting as a sort of living crown above her head. But what if these snakes weren't just decorative? What if they, too, were part of Medusa's immense power? In many cultures, snakes have been revered as symbols of rebirth, healing, and protection. They're often depicted as wise and powerful creatures capable of shedding their skin and starting anew, representing transformation and renewal. This symbolism is particularly fitting for Medusa, who was once a beautiful woman before being cursed by Athena. Her snakes could therefore be seen as a representation of her own ability to transform and heal, as well as a symbol of her power and wisdom. Furthermore, snakes have also been associated with fertility and motherhood, which is interesting considering that despite being a monster, Medusa was still able to bear children with Poseidon. In that sense, her snakes could be interpreted as a symbol of her femininity and her role as a mother. By reframing Medusa's snakes as symbols of power, wisdom, and motherhood, we begin to see her in a new light. Rather than being a monstrous and terrifying creature, she becomes a symbol of female strength and resilience. As we continue to explore Medusa's powers, it's important to remember that she wasn't just a monster, but a powerful figure who was revered and respected by the ancient Greeks. In fact, the ancient Greeks believed that Medusa's likeness could be used to ward off evil and bring good luck. They would place images of her on shields, temples, and armor, believing that her presence would drive away evil spirits and bring victory in battle. This belief in Medusa's protective powers led to her being depicted as a hero in some myths, such as the story of Perseus, where she helps him defeat the sea monster Cetus sent by King Polydectes to kill him. In this tale, Medusa is portrayed as a benevolent figure who helps those in need, further challenging the notion that she was simply a vicious and merciless monster. In modern times, Medusa has been reinterpreted as a feminist icon, a symbol of female empowerment and resistance against male oppression. This reinterpretation is evident in contemporary art and literature, such as the painting Medusa by Louise Bourgeois, which depicts the monster as a strong and independent woman. Overall, Medusa's influence on culture and society is undeniable, and her powers continue to be explored and reinterpreted in new and exciting ways. When we take a closer look at Medusa's powers, we realize that they were much more complex and nuanced than initially meets the eye. Her gaze, her curse, and even her snakes can be interpreted in new ways, revealing a much deeper and more powerful meaning. Ultimately, Medusa's true power lay not just in her ability to turn people to stone, but in her resilience, her determination, and her ability to strike terror into the hearts of even the most powerful gods. So perhaps the real question isn't what Medusa's powers were, but whether we have truly understood them at all. Now, before we leave, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell for more mythological secrets revealed. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.